Well, good morning. Thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. My name is Rocky Moretti. Moretti is spelled Moretti, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research with TRIP. TRIP is a nonprofit transportation research organization based in Washington, D.C. We're supported by a coalition of manufacturing, insurance, construction, labor, and engineering organizations. And we're releasing a report today looking at Oklahoma's transportation system. After my comments, we'll also hear from Leslie Gamble with Oklahoma AAA. And the format is after I give my comments and we hear from Leslie, we'll welcome questions from the media. You have a raise hand function on Zoom or also chat function. And if you indicate you have a question after our comments, then my colleague Carolyn Kelly will elevate you to panelist status so that you can ask your questions or follow-up questions, and we'll be happy to hear from you. TRIP as an organization has been in business. This is our 50th year. In a typical year, we'll release upwards of 15 state transportation reports and 2 or 3 national reports, really looking at the condition of the transportation system, particularly roads and bridges, traffic safety, traffic congestion, and also the impact of transportation on economic development. The report we're releasing today, Keeping Oklahoma Moving Forward, is based on analysis of the latest data from the Oklahoma Department of Transportation and the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration, and also analysis done by organizations including the Texas Transportation Institute, which also analyzes data, particularly in the area of traffic congestion. The key findings of the report is the state continues to make significant progress in terms of improving bridge conditions, of making sure that the major state roads are being kept in good condition, but faces significant challenges moving forward and being able to make further progress. In the case of pavements and actually bridges, not seeing that progress slip back. We also noticed that as the state recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic, that we're going to see continued growth in vehicle travel, also putting additional pressure on the state's transportation safety challenges. The report also notes that with population increasing during the period, as well as gross domestic product, obviously very positives for Oklahoma. Again, the recovery is putting additional stress on the system, and that's going to increase the need for adequate funding at the state and local level. We've been watching on a monthly basis as new data comes in terms of vehicle travel. In Oklahoma, as we saw across the country, there was a significant drop in vehicle travel during the initial lockdown and restrictions of the COVID-19 pandemic. By April of 2020, vehicle travel in Oklahoma had dropped by 33%. But the newest data, which is from this March, when you compare it to the most recent pre-pandemic March, which was 2019, vehicle travel in Oklahoma was actually 5% higher than March of 2019. So we were seeing vehicle travel back to its pre-pandemic levels. We did a national report looking at this several weeks ago and did note that we are seeing slightly different variations in terms of traffic congestion. We're seeing evening rush hours returning pretty close to pre-pandemic levels, but morning rush hours still not back to that level, and actually seeing some increases in vehicle travel through the midday, and that's likely due to increased use of people working at home, even post-pandemic, where there seems to be likely more flexibility in work formats. The report also took a look at what's happening with pavement conditions and noted that while 90% of state-maintained highways have pavements in good or fair condition in Oklahoma, the state points out that when it looks into its 8-year long-range plan in terms of the pavement repairs and reconstruction that need to happen to keep at that level, that they only have adequate funding for approximately 15% of those needed projects. We also took a look at the impact of rough roads and rough pavements, and certainly most of the pavements in Oklahoma are maintained by local governments. And we noticed that the average motorist in Oklahoma is paying an additional $394 annually in the cost of driving on rough roads. And that's about $1 billion annually that consumers in Oklahoma are paying in those additional costs, both because of accelerated depreciation. The worse shape roads are in, the more vehicles are depreciating, but also additional routine repairs and additional fuel consumption and tire wear. And certainly additional fuel also has an environmental aspect to that as well. We also took a look at bridges in Oklahoma. Tripp has been doing reports in Oklahoma, going back, several decades. But 15 years ago, the high number of deficient bridges in Oklahoma were a tremendous challenge. And Oklahoma has just made tremendous strides. In 2004, 1,200 of the state-maintained bridges were structurally deficient. But as of last year, that number had dropped to 86. That's a tremendous rate of progress, and that comes with a lot of hard work, a lot of significant investment that the Oklahoma legislature has been willing to fund over the years. But as the state points out, as it looks into the future over the next 8 years, they estimate approximately 1,100 of state-maintained bridges in the state are at risk of becoming structurally deficient unless the state can make the ongoing maintenance and repairs that are necessary to make that happen. So they've really turned the corner. They've made significant improvements, but without adequate resources, they're going to start to slip back. We also took a look at traffic congestion. And as the report notes, that the cost of traffic congestion is obviously the lost time for personal vehicles, but also commercial vehicles in terms of the value of that lost time, but also additional fuel consumption. And we estimate that statewide that cost is $1.5 billion annually. We also took a look at that regionally. And the Tripp report finds that for the average motorist in the Oklahoma City area, the cost of traffic congestion annually and delays and wasted fuel is $842 annually. And the average motorist is spending an additional 50 hours annually stuck in traffic due to traffic congestion. The Tripp report found that in the Tulsa area, the average motorist is spending an additional $732 annually due to traffic congestion, which delays their ability to get places and also wastes additional fuel. And we estimate they're spending an additional 46 hours annually stuck in traffic. The report includes a list of some of the most congested highway corridors, both in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. It includes portions of the state's major interstates 35, 40, and 44, as well as state highways 64 and 75. The report also notes that Oklahoma continues to have a very high rate of traffic fatalities. The report estimates that in 2019, Oklahoma's traffic fatality rate was the 6th highest in the nation. And with over the last 5 years, more than 3,200 people being killed, there's room for significant improvement. The report also notes that the traffic fatality rate on the state's rural non-interstate routes is approximately double on all other routes in the state. So that gives you some sense of the impact of improved roadway safety design. And these are cost-effective safety improvements that when those investments are made, we see a significant improvement in traffic safety. There's steps like adding rumble strips, improving lane markings, paving shoulders, improving bike and pedestrian facilities. All of these have significant impacts on improving traffic safety. Finally, in conclusion, the report points out that $294 billion worth of goods are shipped annually in Oklahoma, the majority of them being shipped on the state's highways. And the report also notes that investing in the transportation system is a significant source of employment in Oklahoma, with approximately 51,000 jobs annually being tied directly to the state's investment in its transportation system, and approximately 800,000 jobs annually in a variety of sectors of the economy in Oklahoma are highly dependent on the reliability, safety, and condition of the state's transportation system. As we speak, there are ongoing deliberations in Washington about an infrastructure package that would have significant additional funding for roads and bridges and surface transportation in Oklahoma. And that funding, if approved, would be above and beyond a long-term federal surface transportation program. The current program expires at the end of September of this year, and there are proposals working through the legislature on the House and Senate side that would authorize a long-term sustainable surface transportation program, which combined with the infrastructure package could result in significant additional funding in Oklahoma. We think it's important that that program be reliably funded and also provide states the flexibility so that they can ensure that those additional resources are spent on projects that will be of the most good. With those comments now, I'm going to call on Leslie Gamble with the Oklahoma AAA to comment on our report. Leslie?
Yes. Hello, thank you. And thank you, Rocky, for allowing me to join today and respond to this trip report as well. My name is spelled Leslie Gamble, and I am AAA Oklahoma spokesperson. And just the takeaways for me from the trip report were definitely related to the cost to our own vehicles that we sometimes don't even really realize is related to the wear and tear on the roads. But nearly $400 a year each of us will spend on our vehicles because of deteriorated road conditions in our state. And so that's why balancing the infrastructure investments is so very important, and why we're really grateful, I think, to our legislature and to ODOT and other leaders for investing so greatly in fixing these roads and bridges across our state. We have seen tremendous progress, as Rocky was able to allude to specifically there in the bridges. I think that, as we all know, Oklahoma has a lot of open road. We have a lot of rural roads, and it was shocking to me to see that on our non-interstate rural roads, the fatality rate there is more than double that of all other roads. This is something that means that if you're traveling in a rural area, if you live in rural areas or going to one of our beautiful lakes, you're going to want to be extra cautious on these roads. There may seem to not be that much traffic, but there's still danger. And driving distracted is something that can lead to these kind of things, lead to these tragedies. So driving distracted, even on a rural road, can sure end up in a fatality. And overall, as you heard, Oklahoma has the 6th highest fatality crash rate of any state in the nation. Hopefully, with the improvements that we are continuing to make in our roads, the contributing factor of the roads and their deterioration to that will be minimized. We as drivers have certain responsibilities, of course, as well, to keep our eyes on the road, minds on driving. So, the takeaway for me also was that, with the conditions of our roads and that $400 average that we spend on keeping up our vehicles and maintaining them, even though because we've been driving on deteriorated roads, there may be a different route that you may want to consider. Check out different routes to minimize that wear and tear on your vehicle. And I just want to, again, commend ODOT and our leadership of our state for making such great progress. I certainly join Rocky in expressing support, and would encourage anyone to encourage our viewers to contact their legislators at the federal level. So their senator and representatives from Oklahoma, to let them know they support the ongoing funding and increase in funding to our state for roads and bridges. That's it for me.
Thank you, Leslie. We're gonna hold on for a couple of minutes to see. Carolyn, has anyone indicated that they have a question?
Yep, I see a question from Ken Miller with the Associated Press. Ken, I'll promote you to a panelist and you'll be able to ask your question live. So if you unmute your line, you can go ahead and ask your question, Ken.
Okay, it was talking to me, so I was listening. Yes, first of all, thank you very much. My question is going to be about the bridges, and I'm sure you are all well aware of what's happened with the bridge over at Memphis, Tennessee. Curious if any Oklahoma bridges are similar in design, in their structure, in the materials that are used in the bridge at Memphis. Any bridges in Oklahoma of that nature that would cause a concern in Oklahoma?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fairly technical question. So I think ultimately, I think the bridge engineers with the Oklahoma Department of Transportation would be the best people to address that. But I will say that I think now it's probably been about 15 years when there was that significant and horrible bridge collapse at the interstate in Minneapolis that took a number of lives. That really drew a lot of attention to bridges that were deemed fracture critical, a certain type of engineering flaw. And very quickly across the country, bridges were inspected to see if that vulnerability existed elsewhere. And a number of bridge repairs subsequently occurred. So I would anticipate, but again, this is really a question for the Department of Transportation, that similar evaluations are happening across the country. I mean, the reason we have nearly 600,000 bridges in this country and thankfully very few collapses is that the bridges are inspected regularly and we learn from failures and that those lessons are then applied. So I think that's a great question and I think the department can address it, but that really is the pattern we've seen in the past.
Thank you.
We have another question from James King that was submitted via the chat. James, I've just promoted you to a panelist. If you'd like to ask your question live, unmute your line and you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you guys for taking the time to do this. Here in Oklahoma, the county system has over 2,000 deficient bridges, and currently most counties can do about 1 or 2 of those projects a year. I guess in your view, Mr. Moretti, what could be done to remedy this besides just funding coming in from a national level? Because I believe I've spoken to a few counties in and around Tulsa County, and they're saying that the state has continuously taken funding from their county improvement roads and bridges funding, which has kind of slowed them down even more.
Certainly, thank you, James, for that question. Certainly, when we look at the data across the country, while typically state-maintained bridges are the most heavily traveled, obviously the backbone of the state's transportation system, county and local bridges are more numerous, carry significant levels of traffic, and in often cases, at the end of the day, have higher deficiency numbers. And typically, because improving bridges and in some cases replacing them or rebuilding them obviously is quite expensive, usually it takes additional resources from the state level to assist with local governments. So to be honest, this report didn't get into the details of state funding sharing with local governments. But certainly that is the challenge within the state, is to make sure that in addition to the state system, bridges being maintained, that both local governments are raising enough funding, but also in many cases getting additional state help with those projects.
Yeah, and a quick follow. Sure. Where does Oklahoma rank generally compared to some of the states you've done in recent years, months, this type of report for?
Sure. You know, we pointed out 2004 in terms of how many state maintained bridges were structurally deficient, and the situation was as bad or perhaps even more dire at the local level. And in the early 2000s, Oklahoma consistently showed up with the greatest share of structurally deficient bridges in the country. And that number now is dropping and around the national average. So the state, it would probably win the most improved category when it comes to bridges, but there still is additional work. And I think you've raised, I think, a critical issue, which is in addition to the improvement at the state level, additional improvements are also needed in terms of locally maintained bridges.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised or questions in the queue. If there are any other questions, go ahead and let us know now that you'd like to ask that. And I'll just reiterate again that the recording of this news conference will be available on TRIP's website in about half an hour or so. The full report and the regional news releases are also there as well. And I don't see any other questions. So Rocky, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, and certainly I can't speak for Leslie, but you know, I will certainly be available for additional one-on-one interviews throughout the day, and our myself and Carolyn's contact information is on all of our material, and if there's any additional questions later in the day that journalists have, by all means, I'd be happy to address them. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar, and again, thank you to our guest, Leslie Gamble, and thanks to everyone who took the time to attend today's webinar. Thank you.